Until the late 20th century, children with disabilities were often viewed as incapable of learning and either did not attend school at all or attended a segregated special school. Fortunately, society now recognises that those with disabilities deserve the same rights and access to opportunities as those without disabilities, including the right to an appropriate education at a mainstream school. In light of national policies and documents such as the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians, the Disability Discrimination Act 1992 and Disability Standards for Education 2005, education of students with disabilities in Australia has seen a move away from segregation to integration, where children with disabilities were allowed to attend mainstream classrooms but were not necessarily accommodated for, and more recently towards inclusion. An inclusive approach to education argues that the needs of all students should be catered for, regardless of their gender, religion, level of ability, or any other form of diversity. It involves embracing human diversity and supporting and valuing the belonging and full participation of all individuals in all aspects of education. However, as the saying goes, old habits die hard, with recent research and incidents reported in the media indicating that many individuals, including educators, still hold negative attitudes towards students with disabilities and demonstrate an unwillingness to accommodate these students in their classroom. Throughout this presentation, I'll be exploring some of these negative attitudes and how they impact the educational experiences of students with disabilities. I will consider some of the policy and pedagogical implications related to this issue and propose strategies that can be implemented to promote more positive attitudes towards disability and therefore create a more inclusive classroom environment for all students. Attitudes towards students with disabilities. While the attitude towards students with disabilities as incapable of learning is no longer held by a majority of educators, research suggests that teachers still often hold different, usually lower expectations of students with disabilities compared to non-disabled students. Cook suggests that teachers also hold different expectations depending on the type or severity of the student's disability. He suggests that teachers often hold typical expectations for students with mild or hidden disabilities, such as learning disabilities or behavioural disorders, and suggests that teachers treat these students the same as non-disabled students because they look normal. On the other hand, teachers are more likely to hold lower expectations of students with more severe or obvious disabilities. So how do these expectations impact on the educational experience of students with disabilities? In both of these examples, the teacher's attitudes and assumptions about the student's level of ability can be detrimental to the student's educational experience. Students with mild or less obvious disabilities who are treated the same as typically developing peers and expected to reach the same goals in the same timeframe as students without disabilities may find the work extremely challenging, which can lead to low self-esteem and frustration if the student is not able to complete the work to the standard that the teacher expects. These students may feel like their disability is being dismissed or ignored if teachers refuse to accommodate the student's needs and adjust their goals and expectations. On the other hand, students with more severe disabilities who are set unreasonably low goals in terms of academic achievement and behaviour are not being provided with adequate opportunities to learn and be challenged and are therefore unlikely to reach their full potential. In a recent report exploring the experiences of students with disabilities in Victorian schools from the perspective of students, their parents and their teachers, many parents stress the importance of genuine participation and learning for their child. However, many parents shared examples of times when their child experienced the complete opposite, such as, "My child had no learning goals and no direction and frequently spent his time wandering the corridors of the school unattended. My child was left alone to daydream and do whatever he felt like. They don't see a future for people with disability. When my daughter went on school camp, the teachers organised a careers pathway session with everyone except her." The experiences of these students reflect the attitude that educating students with disabilities in a mainstream classroom is not worth it or not possible, because students with disabilities are seen as not as intelligent or capable as their non-disabled peers. Similarly, in a study exploring pre-service teachers' attitudes towards inclusion of students with special education needs in mainstream classrooms, many participants believed that the idea of inclusion was impossible, idealistic, and impractical. Many of the participants in this study believed that it did not make sense for all students with disabilities to be educated in mainstream schools, noting the difficulty and pressure placed on the teacher due to having to teach and accommodate many diverse needs. Existing teachers also acknowledge the extra pressure, difficulty and time demands associated with trying to accommodate the needs of students with disabilities, with some teachers holding the attitude that including students with disabilities into mainstream education takes time away from other students. For example, as one teacher explained, "It's frustrating having kids with severe disabilities in your classes. This is because you spend most of your time dealing with them and cannot give adequate help to other students in the class." Teachers' attitudes in relation to their own ability to successfully teach students with disabilities can also influence whether students receive an inclusive education. Research exploring teacher self-efficacy with respect to inclusion has found that teachers who believe they are effective in teaching students with disabilities are more willing to include those students in their classroom. On the other hand, teachers who lack confidence and knowledge about how to teach students with disabilities may hold negative attitudes about the presence of students with disabilities in their class. Avramidis, Bayliss and Burden found that while majority of teachers they surveyed supported the right of all students to receive an inclusive education in a mainstream school, many of these same teachers did not want students with disabilities in their own classroom because they did not feel adequately prepared or confident in their own abilities to provide an education that met the additional needs of students with disabilities. So how do these negative attitudes impact on the educational experience of students with disabilities? Research has shown that one of the most important predictors of successful inclusion of students with disabilities into mainstream classrooms is the attitude of teachers. Theorist Pierre Bourdieu refers to the beliefs, values, norms, and attitudes held by individuals as their habitus, or internalized social structures, and suggests that an individual's habitus is embodied but is visible through practice. This theory has implications for teachers and inclusive education, as it suggests that a teacher's values, beliefs, and attitudes towards students with disability become visible in their approaches to teaching, and that a teacher's habitus influences the way they relate with students, the type of teaching approaches they use, and how they teach to include or exclude students from active participation. While negative attitudes towards inclusion of students with disabilities do not always result in negative or discriminatory behaviours, research has shown that there is a strong correlation. When teachers do not fully understand a student's disability or feel overwhelmed by inclusion, they are less likely to individualise and differentiate lesson plans to suit the diversity of students' needs, and are less likely to provide the necessary support that would create a beneficial learning environment. Unfortunately, in schools where teachers hold negative attitudes towards students with disabilities or are unwilling to accommodate these students because they don't know how or find it too hard, students with disabilities are more likely to be victims of discriminatory and exclusive behaviours. Teachers who hold these attitudes may also make adjustments to their teaching based on stereotypes and assumptions about a student's disability that are not actually beneficial and may even be harmful to that student's learning and development. For example, a recent report undertaken by the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission explored the experiences of students with disabilities in Victorian schools by surveying nearly 2,000 parents, students and educators. This report found that 31.7% of students reported being unable to participate on the same basis as their non-disabled peers. Almost half of student participants felt unsupported by their teachers and gave examples of teachers who were dismissive of and misunderstood their disability, and who were unwilling to provide assistance, make adjustments, or attend training about their disability. In this same report, 1 in 4 educators reported witnessing discrimination at their school towards students with disabilities, including exclusion from camps and excursions, inappropriate behaviour management, showing audiovisual material without captions, and a failure to provide or work effectively with support staff. This type of discriminatory and exclusive behaviour stems from the attitude that including students with disabilities is too hard, not worth it, or impractical, and not only denies students the opportunity to engage with learning and academic material to their full potential, it also prevents students from being able to interact with their peers in more relaxed environments and social events, and therefore can prevent students from developing a sense of belonging within the school community. What are the policy and pedagogical implications of this issue? Many national and international policy documents recognised in Australia outline the requirement of schools and teachers to provide an inclusive education to students with disabilities, such as the Disability Discrimination Act 1992, which explicitly states, "It is unlawful for an educational authority to discriminate against a student on the ground of the student's disability, by denying the student access or limiting the student's access to any benefit provided by the educational authority." Similarly, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child sets out the basic human rights of children everywhere, and includes the right to an education that allows the development of each child's personality and talents to the full. These rights apply to every child, regardless of race, religion, level of ability, and any other form of diversity. Therefore, regardless of personal attitudes and beliefs towards inclusion of students with disabilities in mainstream education as too hard, impractical, or not worth it, it is critical that teachers adopt inclusive teaching strategies into their classroom. These methods, such as differentiating instruction and personalising learning, allow all students, including those with disabilities, to participate in all aspects of education to their full potential. Differentiated instruction is a teaching strategy that acknowledges that students come to school with different prior educational experiences, different motivations and priorities, and different learning styles. Teachers use this knowledge when planning to determine what students are going to learn, how they're going to learn it, and how they're going to demonstrate this learning, to ensure that the different needs and abilities of all their students are being met. An example of differentiated instruction is tiered instruction, where all students learn the same fundamental skills and knowledge and achieve the same learning objectives, but through varying modes and activities that differ in their level of complexity. Personalised learning. Personalised or student-centred learning goes further than differentiated instruction, by involving the student in determining how they learn best and what works for them. Personalised learning provides choice to students in regards to what and how they learn, is paced to students' needs, tailored to learning preferences, and customised to the specific interests of different learners. Both differentiated instruction and personalised learning do not just benefit students with disabilities. They create a classroom environment that is inclusive and accommodates the diverse learning styles and needs of all students. Strategies to promote positive teacher attitudes towards inclusion of students with disabilities into mainstream classrooms. As highlighted previously, many teachers' negative attitudes towards inclusion stem from their own lack of confidence and knowledge about how to accommodate and meet the needs of students with disabilities. Research has found that teachers who feel more confident about how to teach students with disabilities are more likely to hold positive attitudes towards the inclusion of students with disabilities in their classroom. Therefore, a strategy to promote positive attitudes towards inclusion is to provide professional development training to both pre-service and existing teachers about how to implement inclusive practices. According to Lamb and Bones, positive attitudes and confidence towards inclusion is a learned process that is strongly influenced by the amount and the kind of contact pre-service teachers and existing teachers have with additional needs students. Therefore, equipping teachers with the knowledge, skills, and resources to teach students with disabilities helps to increase their confidence and improve their attitudes towards inclusion of these students in their classroom. As a pre-service teacher, I will continue to engage with and participate in units such as EDF1029 to enhance my knowledge and understanding about specific disabilities and about inclusive education in general. I will also learn from more experienced educators and mentors while on professional experience placements and observe and reflect on the effectiveness of strategies they use to accommodate the additional needs of students in their class and create an inclusive classroom environment. As a future teacher, I will continue this process of lifelong learning and continue to update and enhance my understandings, knowledge, and skills about how to provide an inclusive education to all students, including students with disabilities, by attending professional development workshops and seminars and working together with colleagues. As a future teacher, I will also ensure I get to know each individual child and their family so that I can understand their unique needs and implement teaching strategies that are appropriate and responsive to those needs. Another strategy to improve attitudes and therefore behaviour towards inclusion of students with disabilities in mainstream education is for teachers to be self-aware and regularly and honestly reflect on their own beliefs about and attitudes towards students with disabilities and inclusion in general. As a future teacher, I will be open-minded and flexible and try not to make any assumptions about a student's abilities or personality based on stereotypes, stigmas, or past experiences teaching students with the same diagnosis. This involves holding high but realistic expectations of each child and doing everything I possibly can to help all students reach their goals and full potential. As it is ultimately up to the teacher to decide what happens and does not happen within the four walls of their classroom, successful implementation of inclusive policies and practices relies on positive attitudes held by teachers towards inclusion of students with disabilities. Unfortunately, despite national and international policies and documents outlining the right for all students to receive an appropriate education that allows them to participate and develop to their full potential, the negative or uninformed attitudes of some teachers towards inclusion and towards students with disabilities is still a barrier that is preventing many students with disabilities from receiving inclusive education in today's society. In order to create an inclusive classroom environment where all students, including those with disabilities, can thrive and reach their full potential, teachers must be self-aware and regularly and honestly reflect on any bias or negative attitudes they hold towards students with disabilities in their class. Rather than holding the attitude that inclusion of students with disabilities into mainstream school is impractical and impossible, it is vital that teachers hold high but realistic expectations of all students and disregard any preconceived assumptions about a student's abilities based on stereotypes or past experiences with students who have the same diagnosis. When implemented successfully, inclusive education ensures the full participation and involvement of all students in all aspects of education and creates an environment where all students are able to thrive and feel safe, happy, and supported. While inclusive education is certainly not easy, it is possible and is definitely worth the effort for the benefit of all students.